Hello, in this class we're going to look at functions. Functions are a very important part of any programming language, and they allow us to reuse code that we've written before. So once we've figured out how to do something, we can wrap it up in a function, and then we can use it over and over again. So many programmers have a repertoire of functions that they would use over and over again. So for functions, we're going to get straight down to business and look at some code. So this is example 11.php, and this first piece of code here is just outputting a bunch of stars. Now this is a little bit silly because obviously we could have put star, 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 star all in one statement, but I just wanted to show you how the idea of code reuse works. So here we're displaying a bunch of stars one after the other, and what we can do is every time we want to use this code, we could copy and paste it and use it somewhere else. But that would be a bit inefficient because first of all it would give us way more code than we need. You know, if we're using this 20 times, it's going to be repeated 20 times when that's actually not necessary. Also, if we modified this slightly, we figured out we wanted to do it a little bit differently, we would have to go change all the 20 places that we copied and pasted it. So if ever you're copying and pasting code, you know, that's a sign that something is going on that shouldn't really be happening. Okay? So here I have created a function called starburst. So I've taken the code that I want to use over and over again, taken the code I want to reuse, and I've wrapped it up in a function. So the syntax for a function is we have this keyword here, function, and then we have the name of the function. So this is what we're going to use to call it later on. We're going to refer to it by this name. Here we have an open bracket and a closed bracket. That's all we're doing for the moment here. And then we have our open curly bracket and closed curly bracket to mark the beginning and end of it. And so the repeated code goes inside there then. So now anytime I want to do that, I can just say starburst. And so anytime I say starburst in the code, all of this code here will be executed. If I decide I want to have a little variation in my starburst and put in an exclamation mark there or something, I need only change that once, and then every time I call starburst, that'll be changed, or I can change that back. So function, the name of the function, open bracket, close bracket, and then the code. Obviously this is ridiculously simple code, but I just want to illustrate the point here. Now, here I have a second function called hashburst, and this does much the same, except it displays hash symbols and it displays any number of them. Okay? So it's possible for us in PHP and in other programming languages as well, of course, to pass in parameters into a function. So this I think displays what, 10 stars, isn't it? 1, 2, 13 I think. Okay. Suppose that I want to display any number of them. Well, this is what hashburst does. Okay. So hashburst is a function again, and this time it takes, inside in the brackets there, it takes a parameter. So we've called that parameter, in this case we've called it number. So this is a value that will be passed into the function when it's called. So I could say, for example, hashburst17, just comment that out there. And when I save that and run it, we see there's 17 hash symbols there. You'll have to take my word for that, there's 17 of them. Okay? If I change this to 7, we can see there's 7 of them. So this is using a loop to go round and round and output the hash symbol. Excuse me. And the loop is counting from 1 to whatever number it gets passed in here. So whatever value gets passed in here, inside in this function then, that's known as number. And so we can refer to it using the number variable name. In this case now, I'm going to actually put the number of times I want it to be displayed into another variable called count. I'm going to output this is hash burst with count as the parameter, and I'm putting count in here. I'll save and run. And so that's what 55 hash symbols would look like. We'll change this to 25. That's 25 of them. Now, you'll notice that here 25 is in variable count, and we pass in variable count into the hash burst function. Inside here, when hash burst receives a value, it doesn't know or care what its name was outside of the hash burst function. It just knows this is a number coming in the door, there's some value coming in the door, and it's going to be called, we're going to call it number. And inside the function, we have access to the variable number. The fact that it was called count outside doesn't affect how hash burst works, but that can sometimes cause confusion. The variable that's passed in might have a different name inside in the function. Another thing then that we must be mindful of is the fact that once hash burst or any function is written and we know it's working, we don't have to worry or care about the details of what's going on inside. So we shouldn't need to know that this is I. We shouldn't need to know what's happening with number. All we know is that hash burst is a function, and we pass in the number of times we want the hash to appear. So we don't need to look at the details inside in the function. Another important point then we have to bear in mind is that outside of this function, the variable number doesn't exist. We don't have access to it outside of that function. So number is only available to us when we're inside here. We could write another function, I don't know, exclamation burst or something, and we might, well, let's do that. Let's do that actually. So we might have something like exclamation burst. I'll call it X burst. Now, you'll notice here I've also said number. This number and this number are not the same number. They only exist inside in that function. And that's an important point. Now, as well as passing values into a function, sometimes we want a function to give us back a value. And that's called returning a value. So that's what we're going to look at next. That's very useful and very powerful. So let's now take a look at some text we some code we used before. So this was the code we wrote to take a number and to generate its English equivalent. So remember, for 3 it gave us THREE, and for 9 it gave us NINE. So we used this when we were looking at the if statements and the case and the switch. Now, so this code is useful, and you can see how we might want to use this over and over again in a program. And copying and pasting it poses a few problems. So the first one is obviously that it's inefficient. Okay, it's wasteful. The second thing is that to get this to work properly, we need to know to put the number that we want to convert into English into a variable called a number2. So we have to go and look at the code for switch in order to know that. Now, the main job that switch does is, well, actually the only job it does, is put something into a variable called text2. And then we can use the content of text2 in our output. You notice that we have to go and look inside the details of this chunk of code in order to know that. We have to go and look and see that. So we have to know to put the number we want into number2, and then we have to know the answer that we're looking for is in text2. Now, we're going to convert this into a function, and we're going to pass in the number that we want. And that's something we've already seen. That's just like the starburst function or the hashburst function. But this function is also going to give us back the answer that we're looking for. And that's really important. So let's say we're going to pass in a number. So first of all, we're going to call this function function num to eng. And it's going to take a number. So we'll just call it num. Okay? No. So we're going to do a switch with num. And this is all going to be pretty much the same. We need to put in our braces here and our braces. So now we have a function that works pretty much the same as that did before, but it's putting the answer into text2. Now what we want to do is we want it to actually give us back the answer. So we're going to say return. Now I hate writing code live because something always goes wrong. So we say return. So the answer that we wanted to give back is what we're going to return. Okay. Now you'll notice all mention of text2, which was the way this code was giving back the answer before. That's all being removed. And so now we'll have a look at this. So I think this should work. I haven't tested it before. So we have function num to eng. We pass in a variable called num. Now the switch statement here takes num, and if num is 0, it's going to return 0. Now, and then it's done. Okay? And so this function is going to become 0, essentially, where it is in the code. So when we return a value, the function, in terms of the syntax, in terms of the way it looks in the code, doesn't so much do something as it does become something. So here, so number 2 is 6. So number 2 is what we're interested in. So we can say, I would like, no, I think we need to break this up a bit. We need to say I would like, and then I'm going to say num to eng. So I'm going to pass in as a variable number 2. So now we have number 2 is 6. So we're going to pass into this number 2. So let's see if that works. I'd be impressed if it works first time. I would like 6 bananas, please. So we can see there, it does the exact same thing now. It works perfectly fine. And we just need to put in a space there. Okay. So now we have a function that does the same as the code we had before. What I would like you to do now as an exercise, and this is an exercise not so much in functions, but is in string manipulation, is I would like you to extend this function so that it works everywhere from 0 to 100. So you can see how it would be very ugly, of course, to have a, if it's 2 then this, if it's 3, if it's 4 it's 5. I mean, something like 71 and 72 and 73 and 74 and 75, they have 2 parts. There's the 70 part, which is going to be the same for every number from 70 to 79. And there's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on part. So you're going to write a function that you're going to extend this function basically, and I don't think a case is the way to go, a switch is the way to go here. It's going to be a bunch of if statements. Going to have the first part, maybe from 0 to 20, you have to just specify them one by one. And then it goes 21, 22, 23, 24. You have like 31, 32, 33, 34. You have like 41, 42, 43. So you can see there's a pattern there. So you don't need 100 individual things to account for. Maybe you need the first 20, and then for something you need the first part of the number and the second part of the number. So that'd be an interesting exercise in logic and in putting strings together. So that's functions. Functions make code writing more efficient because we can reuse code we've already written, and they can also make the code easier to understand. People also use functions as an organizing structure, so they can break the problem down into component parts and work on those individually. And the important thing to remember with functions is that some functions return values and some don't. So some functions do things, whereas other functions really become things. So when you're writing a function, you need to figure out, is it going to return a value or not? And then depending on whether it does or not, its use will be different. The syntax and the way it's used will be slightly different.